We're going to begin in just a minute. All right, good afternoon. My name is Burton Bargerstock, and I'm the Executive Director of the Office for Public Engagement and Scholarship at MSU. And I would like to welcome you to this sixth and final session of our 2021 conference on broader impacts of research, strategies, resources, and partners. In this session, organized as a panel discussion, pairs of researchers and their community partners will share insights and explore strategies for effective collaboration between scholars and nonprofit organizations and government agencies. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to ask everyone to observe two requests with regard to our use of Zoom during this session. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions of the panelists. We'll gather those and come back to them at the end. And please use the chat function to share observations, reactions, and resources. Thank you. I am now pleased to introduce and welcome our distinguished panel of speakers. Brian Beverly, Director, Office of K-12 Outreach, College of Education, and Evelyn Jones, Assistant Superintendent, Flint Community Schools. Edmund McGarrell, Professor, School of Criminal Justice, College of Social Science, and James Yake, Director, Health, Safety, and Nutrition, Genesee Intermediate School District. Irving Vega, Associate Professor, Department of Translational Neuroscience, College of Human Medicine, and Evelyn Esparza Gonzalez, Interim Executive Director, Hispanic Center of Western Michigan. And Cheryl Williams Hexel, Evidence-Based Trauma Treatment Certificate Coordinator, School of Social Work, College of Social Science, and Delicia Barajas, Clinical Coordinator, Families Forward, Ingham Eaton Clinton Community Mental Health. You can learn more about each of our panelists by clicking their names in the online program on the University Outreach and Engagement website. To structure our discussion this afternoon, we have asked the panelists to answer the following questions. Tell us a little about your partnership. How did it get started? What are the key factors that have contributed to the success of your partnership? And what, if any, have been the challenges? After each pair of speakers has responded to these three questions, we will then ask them to discuss a fourth. What advice would you offer to researchers who are interested in exploring partnerships with nonprofit organizations and government agencies? Let's begin with Brian Beverly and Evelyn Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to connect with you all and to share a little bit about our partnership. The Office of K-12 Outreach has been providing support to Flint Community Schools for a number of years. We have several different touch points that relate to that support. The first is a grant from the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation to provide leadership coaching support to principals and central office staff across the district. The second point is a professional development opportunity called the Fellowship of Instructional Leaders, which is funded through Title I and Title II funds from Flint Community Schools, which focuses on strengthening instructional practices across schools as a professional learning opportunity for instructional leadership teams and the principal at each of the schools. And the final touch point is enhanced data support as part of a school improvement grant from the Michigan Department of Education. That data support occurs at Southwestern Classical Academy in Flint. Partnership started off as a offshoot of the Michigan's system of support for priority schools. Flint Northern, which is now closed, but Flint Northern was a priority school as established by the state of Michigan due to low academic performance for a number of years. They were entered into the statewide system of support. And as a part of that, they participated in some professional learning opportunities and also had some coaching. Once that grant from the MDE went away, the district recognized how valuable that support was for Flint Northern and wanted to see that support shared across all of their schools. And so engaged us to start their own fellowship of instructional leaders, which involved instructional leadership teams from every school in their district. Simultaneously, conversations were occurring with the Mott Foundation to provide support to the district. They engaged us in soliciting a grant proposal for leadership and comprehensive support to the district. That's how this partnership has started. It might be a little bit different, as though there's not a research component that is the driver of the relationship. It's more on the technical assistance side, and we are honored to continue to support the educators in Flint. They are the hardest working group of people I've ever been around. Their challenges are not are not connected to effort by any stretch of the imagination. They bring their hard hats and their lunch pails to work every single day, and especially when they're working with us. I'll give an opportunity for Mr. Jones to offer his first perspectives, and then we kind of dive into some of the other questions.
Absolutely. Greetings from Flint, Michigan, Flint Community Schools, everyone. I'm happy to be here, happy to support this effort, and also to represent such a fine community of educators and scholars. I would say that since I have been a part of Flint Community Schools, I'm in my 4th year, one of the driving forces for our continued efforts for success has been the fellowship, the partnership that we have with MSU. And I say that coming in from not knowing anything about what this fellowship had offered or what this partnership was going to bring. And I was finding myself getting lots of help and inspiration, and also support from this partnership. And so this partnership is doing a lot for our leaders. It's doing a lot for our leaders and impacting them professionally, the professional development needed to instructionally, needed to support their teachers, and for leadership teams. What we do know and what we do understand is that we have to stay on top of our learning so that we know what to give our scholars each and every day. And so this fellowship and this partnership has allowed for principals to definitely be able to hone in on their skills, to also do SWOTs, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in their buildings, to understand how to move forward. As we all know, Flint has had a lot of not so good situations happen in our community, and MSU has been a partner through it all. And so we appreciate them. We appreciate the one-on-one. I have a coach, and I meet with my coach regularly to support me in the work that I'm doing. And so it's great to have mentors and coaches to continue to push the envelope and allow us to understand where we need to grow, help us with our constraints, and also ensure that we have the instructional mindset needed for this day and this time. You're muted, sir.
Sorry, thank you. The second question relates to key factors that have contributed to the success of the partnership. I think that we've been intentional in co-constructing what our support looks like. We always start with what are the needs that the district has, what are the needs of the individual schools. What are the needs of the individual school leaders and individual instructional leadership teams? And so we co-construct all of our programming with district leaders and with school leaders. So that co-construction is one part that I think is a strength and a key factor. The other part is being flexible, being nimble. Every school district in the state of Michigan had a major shift over the last calendar year. And it was important for us to also be nimble in supporting Flint Community Schools during that shift. And so we rolled up our sleeves and dug into research on remote instruction to provide Flint Community Schools with some frameworks and some guidance around remote instruction. At the same time, we were also thinking ahead and what does it mean to be prepared to bring students back, and so develop some guidance and rolled up our sleeves again and dove into the research on the virus mitigation and how to reopen schools safely, and so help to guide the district's planning around school reopening. And then beyond that, through some prompting by some generous philanthropic organizations who are eager to support the long-term viability of the Flint Community Schools with some investments in infrastructure, are supporting the district through a strategic planning process so that they are maximizing and leveraging those resources for the benefit of all schools. I think that level of flexibility, that level of nimbleness on our part as we provide support has been a key factor in sustained success with the partnership.
And I would also add just modeling the instructional techniques needed in the classrooms has been very important. Not just giving information, but also modeling it, coming into the buildings and ensuring that when the MSU team come into the buildings, they are being intentional about what the school buildings need. And so if I was to say anything to this webinar, I would say that MSU has been intentional in keeping the main thing the main thing. What is it that Flint needs now? And this has been the conversation every year. What do we need now? What should we be doing now? How can we help you now? When we opened and started talking about our STEM programs, what do you want it to look like? And then they offered expertise around that. And so when you talk about key factors, I think the biggest factor would be keeping the main thing and focusing our attention and keeping our attention in the buildings, leadership teams and principals and PLCs around the main thing.
I think the final question speaks to challenges. Oh, excuse me, next question speaks to challenges. I would point to leadership changes as one of the key challenges for working with this partnership. We have, like I said, we have several touch points and several funding opportunities, several resources for funds. Because of that, we're not necessarily driven by any one of those particular factors, but by all of them. But we're also at the whim of each of those funding sources, right? And so we've been with the Flint Community Schools for 6 years. We're on our 5th superintendent in 6 years. This is I think Mr. Jones is our 7th or 8th deputy superintendent in that same window of time. And so as Mr. Jones pointed to, the need to keep the main thing, that often has shifted what is the main thing based on who is the district leader at the time. But also because we're also so connected with the schools that we're able to make sure that the vision is connected to the work that is already going on in the school. And so the next idea is not so left field and so far a stream of where everyone was already headed, that we try to push coherence on the front end. So leadership challenges in terms of so many shifts and so many different faces over time, but addressing that by establishing real and trusting relationships throughout the district. What are your thoughts on challenges?
I would agree. I wouldn't even take that a step further. I would agree that you know, hopefully I'm the last for a while, but I would agree that the change in leadership, even for me, being here 4 years, I was a principal at one of our elementary schools, and I myself have dealt with the change in leadership and different models coming in and trying to reboot, pivot, right, to those models. And but what this team has decided to do is keep the course moving forward with what we've already decided. And all of those things, going back to literacy, and we have recognized that if our children can't read, there's a ton of other things that they can't do. And so all the work that we've done with MSU over the last 4 years that I've been here, we want to grow from that. We want to see growth in that, in those areas, and we've seen growth in our instructional leaders, in our leadership teams, and in our PLCs. But I would say that the change in leadership has probably been the area where we've had the most challenge.
Thank you. Let's now hear from Edmund McGarrell and James Yake.
Thanks, Burton. And it's a pleasure to be here today, and it's a pleasure to follow Brian and Evelyn early on in our project that also involves collaboration with the schools in Genesee County. We heard about the coaching program that was occurring in the Flint Community Schools, and we heard great things then, and it's clear that that's continued to be a great initiative. Our project involves a collaboration between a research team and the Genesee Intermediate Schools, represented by James, and then a group of schools. It turns out to be 20 schools within multiple districts of Genesee County. The focus is really twofold, and it reflects the partnership that we're talking about. On the one hand, it involves the implementation of a comprehensive school safety initiative that's built around the principles of building positive school climate for the purposes of enhancing a positive school environment and enhancing safety that way. And you know, I won't get into the specifics of the initiative, but basically it builds on principles of restorative practices, trying to address, identify and address potential situations that might reflect mental health or trauma kind of experiences among children, and linking those children to appropriate services. And then also looking at the physical design of the buildings and seeing where some changes might enhance both climate and safety. And those initiatives are led by a 3-person leadership team within each school. So that's what the initiative looks like, and James can kind of, you know, was instrumental in kind of building that framework. And then, as you can imagine, from the research standpoint, we're interested in understanding how those interventions unfold and the impact they have on the schools and on student learning and other positive outcomes. So it's a long-term project. It has very strong, rigorous research design. So we like that from the research side, and we're just now getting to the point where we're starting to analyze the impact of these interventions. But we've learned a lot just by being able to work in this collaborative way. In terms of how we got started, and it's difficult for me at the beginning of March Madness to give credit to some of our friends down at the University of Michigan, but there's a team from the School of Public Health, and then a group of us from the School of Criminal Justice have been working together for a number of years And we had been working in Flint on a community collaborative initiative around issues of public safety and neighborhood revitalization. And through that, we had developed some connections with the Flint community schools and the broader Genesee County schools. And we connected with James and his team. And we were fortuitous in that the National Institute of Justice, which is one of those areas where we look for funding, had developed a pretty major federal initiative around school safety. So that was of interest to us as researchers, and fortunately, it was also of interest to the Genesee Intermediate School District. So we came together and started working on the proposal. I think one of those lessons learned was the value of working together right from the get-go, and finding those mutual areas or those areas of mutual benefit. And James, maybe I'll kick it over to you, because I think this was a little bit different in the way in which we really did put the proposal together, as a collaborative partnership.
Thank you, Ed. It was unique. As a school district, I'm sure my other panelists can attest to this. We get calls every week from someone that wants to partner with us in some way, someone that wants to, sell something to us in some way, be a part of some grant that they received, and the amount of sorting through all of that, especially in a time of crisis, which Flint and the greater Flint community has experienced over the last years, can be overwhelming. What I think was unique about this project is, normally the call is, hey, we got this grant. We want you to partner with us on it. This call was, we're looking at this proposal, and we're thinking about submitting an application. Would you be interested in partnering with us, and what might that look like? And it's hard to believe that it's already 2021, Ed, because I think we started this in 2014 with our first design team that came together with a broad representatives from school districts and police departments and universities to really talk about what a proposal might look like for us. And I think, as you stated, and actually what Evelyn and Brian stated earlier, is this co-constructed aspect of the project. We were really alongside from the beginning of the proposal development, through the design development, through the evaluation and research components about what made sense for us, what was going to be realistic for us as and our schools to be able to do. And I honestly think that made the difference, a huge difference for the success of this particular project, but certainly for the startup of this particular project as well. And we had a couple of iterations because we weren't funded the first attempt, but that co-design process was really instrumental for us and our partners to be engaged along the way.
So if we turn to that second question of some of the factors that have contributed to the success, I think James, already identified that. And again, I agree. I think it's similar to some of what we heard from Brian and Evelyn about, finding those mutual areas of, agreement and interest and being respectful, of each other's, goals and objectives of working collaboratively. I think we as researchers have understood, the challenges for the school district and the participating schools, and have tried to be sensitive to that as we've designed the research. What I can say clearly, James is probably a better judge of that. But what I can say clearly is that the school district has bent over backwards to, work with us in trying to ensure, that we can conduct research that will, be sound and rigorous, and give them, the kind of feedback they need to consider, how these interventions could be sustained within the schools, beyond the life of any particular grant cycle. I think part of it's also the regular communication. So, you know, we as a research team, and James and his team, you know, have been able to stay in contact regularly as issues come up. You know, I think, you know, the movement to a virtual environment, you know, created all kinds of implications in terms of some of our data collection. You know, that really required us to sit down and think through, you know, what can we learn from this experience, and how can we carry this out in a way that's sensitive to the needs of the schools and the children and their families, but that still, you know, can allow us to carry the research forward. And that probably trickles into the second point. You know, along with that communication is the flexibility, and I think you hear that from both of us. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add, James.
Just a couple things that I think you really covered a lot of what I think contributed to our success. I think at the time that we were writing this proposal, there were a few emerging needs that we were really seeing in the schools. Obviously, safety was 2014, that was certainly top of mind and still is today. And school safety was a priority. And at the time, we were also seeing a lot of more significant emerging need of mental health for younger populations, particularly elementary age students. So, you know, we were able to kind of take, you know, this idea of, you know, here are our needs over here in this circle, and Ed and his team and the folks at U of M were to say, you know, okay, this is what we need. And we've just looked for those areas where our needs overlapped, and that's what we focused on. And I think that's really what contributed to our success. And as Ed said, being flexible and adaptable where you have to be, certainly on both sides really contributed.
Yeah, you know, maybe related to that point too, you know, one of the things I love about being at MSU is that land grant mission. And so, you know, while I'm emphasizing the research, you know, we're doing it in a way, you know, where we're also trying to, you know, help build capacity within the schools. And so, you know, when we thought about the interventions that were being developed, so, you know, and this is another kind of place where that partnership worked together well. Yes, so we're looking kind of in the world of evidence, you know, research evidence in terms of what do we think would help address some of these questions. Some of those resonated with James and his team and the broader district and the schools, but then it became a matter of, well, you know, how do we equip the teachers, for example, to, you know, what does it mean to run a restorative circle at the beginning of the week to identify, you know, issues that kids might have encountered or might be encountering. And so we were able to kind of reach into that, you know, that toolkit that MSU broadly offers, and find some people that could come and provide high quality training. And so that became a key part of that. And I think, you know, I think there's a good lesson for us researchers there, in that by being able to do that, we strengthen the interventions that are the subject of our research. And if we glossed over that, you know, we you know, could have been in a position of you know, less effective implementation, as well as less understanding on our part as researchers in terms of what was really occurring in the schools. And I think that in terms of the third question about challenges, there have been, and you know, again, I harken back to Brian and Evelyn, but you know, we were beginning this project at a time that the Flint community was experiencing the trauma of the water crisis, and you know, so thinking about you know, the schools throughout the county had, you know, big issues, big concerns, you know, along with parents and children. So thinking about bringing a new set of interventions kind of, you know, at this particular time, you know, what was both challenging, but also, you know, an opportunity to address concerns within the school. And then of course, COVID, hits and, dramatic effect on the schools, and also raising issues of, well, how do we continue this research activity? And I guess the other point along these lines is, I think we've jointly agreed that we didn't want to think about this as a research grant. We wanted to think about this as a partnership in which these, the lessons that we learned could be sustained over time. And so, as we think about kind of working through these research challenges that do relate to, our obligations to our funding agency, also thinking through, well, then how do we sustain this beyond that? At a time when the schools are dealing with a whole set of issues relating to a pandemic that no one could ever have anticipated. James, anything else you want to add on the challenges?
Well, besides coronavirus, Ed, I think you mentioned all the big ones that we've had to deal with. I think one word that often scares schools is research, right? Because they're kind of worried about what are the implications of that? What does it mean? What will my community mean if they think we're conducting research on children or students or young people? And so we kind of had to work through a lot of that as well in the early phases to really understand, help people understand what we were trying to do. But that orientation that Ed talked about, more towards the community intervention and really the research being, I wouldn't say a secondary component of it, but not necessarily the primary goal. And really helping to stress to our schools, our superintendents, and our local communities that it's important that we do advance this work so that we can share with the broader public education community and community, in this case of criminal justice, about kind of what does work in schools to keep our kids safe and improve outcomes for our young people. And so we kind of focused on those areas, but research was a scary word for a lot of our district leaders in this particular proposal, and it is in general. I think the other thing is that we had a significant number of staff that we were bringing on board with this, and so anytime you have grant funded limited duration, you always are concerned about how to sustain your staff over time. And I think that was something that we did encounter with this, is some turnover in staff to just related to their own job security with an intervention like this. And so that was just something that we had to kind of think about and plan for, and try to develop a strong training program for new staff that came on board. So I think there were other challenges certainly here and there, working with the school resource officers and kind of developing that system in different municipalities, but those seem so far away now, but we were very proactive and worked collectively together to address a lot of those community-based concerns.
Yeah, we can identify more, but it's probably a good point to transition. We can come back as.
Yes, thank you both. We now turn to Irving Vega and Evelyn Esparza Gonzalez.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us join this program. A strong sense of responsibility to serve and to empower the community is at the root of this partnership with the Hispanic Center. We got a grant from the National Institute of Health to promote, or to study, actually, I should say, health disparities in Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. Latinos and Blacks, African Americans are more at risk, and is more prevalent among these underrepresented groups, Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. So we obtained the funding and decided that we need to reach out to the community in the most effective way. And that was actually going to the institutions that were already facilitating the contact with the community. The people that were already engaged with the community, and those that has the trust of the community. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we actually reach out to partners like the Hispanic Center to learn about the activities and the programs that they have already implemented and how we can align our research objective with the activities that they already have in place. So one of the components of the research is education, is to bring awareness about risk factors associated with Alzheimer's disease and rare dementias. The other one is to increase participation of Latinos and African Americans in clinical research. So obviously the Hispanic Center had a lot of educational programs and a lot of activities that are related to empower the community to have a healthy living. So we identify those areas and align, our education material to the programs that are already available at the Hispanic Center. So the root of the partnership was actually to empower the community with information and education so that they lead to healthy living. Evelyn?
Yeah, so I think you covered pretty much the nature of our partnership, but it's even more, it's stronger than that. So Dr. Irving Vega is a leader in our Latinx community and trusted by our community members. And so we have been able to not only keep it at that level, but he has been key in the programming and other pieces when we're thinking about health related initiatives. And so I think that's what makes our partnership even stronger.
So that goes into the factors that contribute to the success, right? So how we can align the needs of the community and be responsive to the needs of the community. Being a grant associated to health disparities, and now in the COVID-19, this established partnership allow us to have the flexibility to respond effectively with a messaging and education about COVID-19, which actually is becoming a risk factor for dementia in the future. COVID-19 affects the central nervous system, and it has becoming a big risk for future cerebrovascular dementia. So we are communicating the community with information about how to reduce the risk of contracting SARS-CoV-2 and have COVID-19, evolve our research so that we can provide testing, COVID-19 testing to the facility, to the community, through the Hispanic Center, to other partners. So we were in position to respond to the needs that the Hispanic Center was telling us that the community have, and still align them to the components of the research. Evelyn?
Just to mention other factors, so Dr. Vega mentioned, he has a great understanding of our community needs. And so as he was, as we were having conversations and we found ourselves doing advocacy and doing education in some areas. And so what we wanted to do was not duplicate efforts, but instead making sure that we added value to any initiatives that we were doing in community. And so in order to do so, he was able to identify exactly what the organization was doing and finding the gaps that we had, because as nonprofit organizations, we usually don't have the financial means or the resources to design programming in the way that we best see it as a need for our community. And so Dr. Vega was great in just identifying those gaps and then providing his programming or his expertise to make our program stronger. Not only that, but we work in different areas and have different networks. So we have been able to increase or improve our reach when it comes to communicating with different communities. So that has been another great benefit of this partnership. And again, I mentioned the advocacy piece. It's so funny, but we have been in the same conversations, and it seems like we're in the same page in most of the in the approach that we want to take with our community, and that just shows that we have the same goals, and that he shares the values and the mission and vision that our nonprofit organization have. And I think that's a great asset for our community, because we have been one of the communities that have been impacted negatively, one of the most impacted communities in this area. And so just having two allies and community working towards the same goals, it's great resource for our community.
So since our research is based on health disparities, again, COVID-19 provided another opportunity to address social determinants of health that leads to, in longitudinal studies, lead to a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. So responding to the needs of the community has been in all aspects, talking to the health department, talking to fundraising, you know, trying to respond to the needs of the community. The strength of our partnership, as I said at the beginning, is the sense of service and empowerment of the community. But then that also aligning that and maintaining the lines of communication and the competing needs and changing needs in the community is one of the main challenges. How to maintain the engagement, how to maintain that coordinated effort toward responding to the needs of the community. I think we have been able to maintain that, even like others have mentioned, changes in leadership. The interaction is with the organization and all the members in the organization and how the organization serves the community. There are changes in leadership, but because we are engaged with different people within the same organization, we have been able to maintain that strong relationship. So that communication, that alignment, constant reminder of this is why we're working together is key to address any challenge that comes in our way. I think that's for us for now.
Yeah.
Yep. You're muted.
It was bound to happen. Thank you. And finally, Cheryl Williams-Hexel and Alicia Barajas, please address the questions.
Thank you so much. We're glad to be here with you today and talk about our work. I think you will notice some themes. It's nice to come. It's validating to be the last presenter and hear that our observations are echoing others. In my work at the School of Social Work, one of the primary focuses, I focus on two projects. Both of them are workforce development projects. One is with the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute, where I support university partnerships with public and tribal child welfare agencies to address child welfare workforce issues. Some of what I share are observations through that work, because that's a big part of my time. The project we're going to talk about today is our evidence-based trauma treatment project, also a workforce intervention. And this project goes back to, we started about 10 years ago, was our first cohort of students. And we have engaged more than 20 agencies over the years in the work of preparing social work students to implement evidence-based practice. The objective of our intervention is to graduate students that are well equipped to provide evidence-based practices. They are trained in specific practices. We do that through investing upstream in developing the capacity of our partner agencies. So we are working with the agencies like the ones that Alicia works with to develop their capacity to implement that, so that we are creating good learning opportunities for our students. We have more than 200 graduates. Alicia is one of them. She's now an agency leader who is supporting the project in a different kind of a way. This started 10 years ago. We received a sub-grant of a National Child Traumatic Stress Network, SAMHSA funded project, where this model was being developed and evaluated in schools of social work across the country. We about 4 years in, based upon evaluation data, we got some additional funding that allowed us to, well, let me back up and say that that initial grant, which of course only lasted 2 years, provided not only resources to the university, but it recognized that our community agencies were pulling their clinicians out of service for training and development. And we actually had some initial resources to provide to our community agencies that partnered with us. Through those projects continue in one way or another through the NCTSN to collect data about student learning, agency implementation. With that, we've been able to learn some things. One of the things that we learned was those community agencies that were implementing with fidelity our students were getting the greatest educational outcomes. So one of the additional pots of money that came to us in a project we worked on for a couple of years, it wasn't with Alicia's agency, it was with another agency here in the Lansing area, was to go in and look at how we could use implementation science to support our community agencies in developing their capacity. So the end outcome is always student learning, but we were also looking at how to develop the capacity of our agencies, many of which didn't have resources to even access some of the training we brought to them. We trained their staff in the same evidence-based practices our students were trained in, and we brought in expert consultation associated with the specific models they're trained in so that they could develop that capacity. Currently, we no longer receive funding for any of this, but it has become a strong part of the student experience and our work here. I'm going to let Alicia talk a little bit about the nature of the partnership from her perspective.
Yeah, and I think, reflecting on the partnership, I've participated in it from a few angles. So when I was a master's graduate student in the School of Social Work, I was a part of this program and in the certificate. So I underwent the training in the evidence-based practice and was able to access some consultation around that. And was paired with a field instructor who had similarly been trained at the agency. So at the conclusion of that year, that field experience turned into a job opportunity. And so that was at the Community Mental Health Authority of Clinton, Eaton, and Ingham counties located here in Lansing. Since then, I have remained at the agency over the years, although my position has changed in a variety of ways. From student into a practitioner using the model with the clients that I was serving. Eventually, after a few years, I repeated the training and took on field students. And so I have been a clinical field supervisor for several master's level students at my agency that have received that same training. Currently, I am a clinical coordinator, which means I oversee clinicians in my agency. And in that role, there has been the ability to supervise the field instructors. So many of my clinicians are now field instructors and have come up through that program. And additionally, hiring graduates of that certificate program because it's very much aligned. The treatment model is one that concurrently was being developed through MDHHS to have a track and an evidence-based training program across the state of Michigan through the community mental health system and through community mental health agencies. So it's the same evidence-based practice. And many of our established clinicians were receiving that training and eventual certification through the state. So the efforts through Michigan State allowed us to have clinical interns come in who were familiar with an evidence-based practice that we were already using, and then we could quickly get them up to speed, working with clients and providing what we knew would be a really high level of service. Additionally, outside of my role at Community Mental Health, I'm also a contractual therapist with the Firecracker Foundation here in the Greater Lansing area. And so my connection to the Firecracker Foundation was ultimately made because of my experience with this project, both with working with students and having that training and being a practitioner myself. And, a quick browsing of the therapists at the Firecracker Foundation who are currently providing services to youth, almost everyone on there has a connection to this partnership, whether as a student or as a field instructor. And so what that has allowed to happen at the Firecracker Foundation is there is continuity in the services that are being provided to youth who've experienced sexual trauma in a way that when students who are placed there graduate, right, clinicians are trained in the exact same model and practices so that a transition can occur to maintain a really smooth provision of services and minimize any disruption that might have to the clients, as well as providing just a shared framework that informs not just the individual work that's being done, but a lot of the parent supports and additional ancillary services that add so much benefit to the youth being served.
Yeah, so if we were to talk about the factors contributing to success, I can really put them in 3 buckets. First is leadership. Second is that we've established a community of practice. And then the third is that our work is anchored in real resources for our partner agencies. So when I talk about leadership, I speak about the leadership of the School of Social Work, who, when the funding went away, which was, of course, lasted at the most for each project 2 years, this work aligns with our land grant mission, and the School of Social Work recognized the significant impact in capacity building with our community agencies. And the project, we're starting our 11th year, so we've survived a couple directors and some changes in leadership, and it's really been an opportunity with that support from leadership to institutionalize this. Started with a 2-year project. Now it is a part of our offering to students and a part of why agencies choose to partner with us to host our students. When I talk about establishing a community of practice, the folks that do trauma work in the community and that are trained in these models, as you can imagine, or maybe you can't, they move from agency to agency in the communities. We're in the Lansing community. We've had reach into Grand Rapids. Western Michigan University has been a collaborator with us because they do a similar project. They had similar funding. We've invested in sharing resources and developing that community of practice. A couple of really concrete outcomes of that. When the pandemic hit and all of our providers had to move from doing traditional therapy with kids face-to-face, they had to pivot and move to teletherapy really quickly. Because we're implementing those evidence-based practices and we're using expert consultants that are connected to the people that developed the practices, we were able to access real technology for our community partners within weeks. So they knew what the research was about how to make that pivot to provide the services using Zoom and other kinds of other platforms for teletherapy. Another example that's non-pandemic of that community of practice is that at one point I noticed that the Center for Survivors on campus was hiring the field instructors from our community agencies. And I said, "What's up, folks?" Of course, there are colleagues over there too. And They said they're the clinicians that interview that have the strongest clinical skills. And we said, you're providing an evidence-based practice, or you're providing services to adults. Their training is in clinical work with children. We partnered with the Center for Survivors and with other agencies that provide sexual assault counseling, and invested in bringing in an evidence-based practice for adult survivors of sexual assault. So we brought that expertise to both our university and community agencies, and now have 2 tracks. At the same time, they had a workforce shortage and couldn't find the folks that were prepared. I had students coming and saying, I really want to do that, but you aren't offering that. So I'm going to start with kids and then figure out how to transfer that to adults. So we've really been able to expand in a way that's based upon our community of practice and the feedback we're getting from the relationships we've built. And I think that speaks to the kinds of real world practice resources that we bring. Our expert consultants, the investment that our School of Social Work makes, are folks that are working with the developers of these models. It's not expertise we have within the School of Social Work. We bring it to our community as a part of our intervention. So Alicia, do you want to talk anything more about the factors related to success?
I think that from the perspective of my agency, right, what makes this so effective and why year after year we continue to participate and say, yes, sign us up for students, right, we will, take them and make it work, is that it is in alignment with the work that we as an agency and across the state have already invested in. So it is not heavy lifting for us to need to pivot to meet the demands of what the university is asking for. It's so in line with the work that our clinicians are already doing and the types of work of development and training that we are already prioritizing. So in that way, it's complementary and parallel to what we're doing, that it ends up being a really natural fit. And for the clinicians who are field supervisors, who are working with students, or the students that we often end up hiring, there is an access to that consultation and to additional resources and training that is a real benefit. It's above and beyond what we are offering, right? And it's a whole different pool of resources that our agency is able to access. Yes, with regards to that consultation and resources related to the evidence-based practice, but additionally, it provides leadership opportunities for so many of our staff who are looking to move forward in their careers and take on additional responsibility. It opens doors for them for discounted access to other trainings through the School of Social Work and the maintenance of their licensure. So in that way, when we know, yes, we will take a student, we know that they're going to be prepared, they're going to be bringing resources to our agency, and the staff that are directly involved with this project have a variety of ways that they are able to get benefit and bring that back to us as well. So in that way, yes, it's great, we can serve more children with this trauma-focused practice, but also we have so many more resources across so many domains that are feeding into our agency.
And what I think I can do is wrap this up with what the challenges have been. And these aren't going to be surprises for you. Turnover of leadership at the agencies and within our school. And more importantly, turnover of workers. We are engaged in a constant reinvestment in the partnership. The partnership, we aren't always equal partners. There are times when the School of Social Work is investing in building an agency's capacity when we know that because of recent turnover, they may be a few years before they're even in a place to host our students. But we know that if we engage them and we bring them in and invest in bringing them into our community of practice, helping them develop the competency in the evidence-based practice, that we are creating potential future relationships. And in all of the communities across the state where we have students, we know that workers move around. So that community of practice helps us sometimes find folks that can work with our students and bring new agencies in. The cost, and there are times when we have students that are challenges. So an agency signs up thinking it's a path to a hire, and they end up investing a lot in someone who really isn't ready for practice yet, and they're engaging with us in that. So it's not always an equal partnership, but it is something that, because of the relationships we're investing in. I think the other thing to know is the cost in time and resources often exceeds the available resources. I spend a lot more time on this project than I do in than is a part of my contract with the university. And but that's how you maintain relationships and partnership, right? And over time, what started out as us offering really high quality national level training that would lead to certification to folks in our community agencies, we were providing that at no cost. Now there's some cost sharing with our agencies. We work to discount that, but there is some cost sharing. And that's been so that we can sustain it. It was lovely to have the initial investment and the evaluation component so that we had data about what worked, because that solidified our partnership when we had to move to a place where it was valuable to everyone to invest in. That's what I have about challenges. Anything else you would add, Alicia?
No, I don't think I have anything additional to add as far as the challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Those are four really good stories, and I really appreciated hearing from them. Now we turn to our final question. And in a short amount of time, I'd like to ask each of the pairs of our panelists, what advice would you offer to researchers who are interested in exploring partnerships with nonprofit organizations and/or government agencies? Brian and Evelyn.
Thank you, and thanks again to all the panelists for your perspectives. I've learned a lot over this last hour or so. I would offer that it's important to, we heard a lot about co-construction and whatnot so far this afternoon. I would argue that you need a variety of perspectives as a part of that co-construction, that it can't be just the one person who's on the same plane as you as it relates to leadership in an organization, that you need perspectives up and down the organization to have input in terms of co-constructing whatever the partnership will entail, whether it's a program, whether it's a research project or whatnot. You need to have a variety and a diversity of perspectives along all demographic lines, but also along layers of the organization.
And I would add to be intentional about their needs, be intentional about what's needed, interrupt what needs to be interrupted. They wouldn't be calling you or asking you to be a part or to have a partnership if there wasn't a need. Keep the need in the forefront of all you do. Protect it. Protect the partnership from other outside sources that would like to add on to what it is you're doing. Most districts, you know, we have been allotted monies to do many things. And so we can pack our buildings up with a whole bunch of stuff, or we can be intentional about what we need and have partners that is helping us and honing in and impacting what we need. So being intentional and protecting that interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Edmund and James.
James, you want to kick this off since I started last time?
Sure. Thanks, Ed. I would just reiterate the importance of finding common ground. Whatever agency that you're trying to work with, whether that's a school district in my case, or in Ed's case, a university. I think that another important thing is start early. whatever that is, start early in the process, start working together early. And I think sometimes, you know, it's easier to develop a partnership and a relationship when you're assigned or you have a specific task that you're working on or a project that you're going to collaborate on. You know, I can feel very confident in our project's coming to a close this year, but I know that I could call Ed for any related need, you know, related to the work that we've been doing or work that he continues to do on. And I also know that if an opportunity came up from Ed for a collaboration or funding or grant, that I feel he'd be able to call us and talk it through with us as well. And vice versa. And so, you know, we've had this project that has a finite amount of time, but we also have a relationship that's long-term and long-lasting. And I think that's kind of what we've focused on through it. Yes, the goal has always been to implement the work that we've been doing, but we've done it in a way that's been very collaborative and very relational oriented. And I think that's been really important for us.
I have little left to add to that, but maybe 2 points specifically for the researchers in the room. And I hope this doesn't come across in a condescending way, but listen first and you know, speak second. I think as researchers, you know, we're trained to think about the research questions that are of interest to us. And I think that oftentimes, you know, we're bringing that out to the field, and that's the way in which we kind of start those conversations. And I think if, you know, if we can grab a cup of coffee with someone like all the partners I've heard today and find out about the needs of, you know, those agencies and, you know, the stakeholders that they work with, and then think about the relationship from that beginning point, I've always been able to find I can fit my research somewhere in that relationship. And the second point is really the one that James made, and that is to think about the long-standing relationship. And I've heard this from some of the others, that, you know, if we can get beyond thinking about a specific project to thinking about the partnership and the collaboration, you know, that brings benefits for students, it brings benefits for our research, it makes us better teachers. And it'll create those opportunities, you know, down the road.
Thank you. Irving and Evelyn.
I think I'm gonna start with what Ed mentioned, and I don't gonna be that apologetic. I'm gonna say that as a person in the academic community, we don't only have to listen, but we have to respect and to recognize the expertise of our partners. In our partnership, when you want to establish a partnership, you have to start with a sense of respect, that those that you are trying to reach out have an expertise that can help you. And you have to listen, you have to be able to recognize that expertise that your partner in the community has. And that has been essential for us to recognize that the trust and the way to communicate with the Latino community in Grand Rapids, the experts are at the Hispanic Center. The one that knows the basis of what are the needs are there in daily contact with the Latino community is the Hispanic Center. So we appreciate the opportunity to add value to what they already are doing. And that has been our emphasis, how we can add value to what they are doing, so that even if the grant goes away, we have able to enhance what they have been doing and is sustainable in the future. So respect is really important. And like I said at the beginning, that sense of service as a researcher, I see research in the ethical perspective, I see research as a service to the community, how I can bring that knowledge back to the community. So that actually is the foundation, is that sense of service and that sense of responsibility and empowerment to the community that maintains our relationship together. Evelyn?
I would say my advice would be to build strong relationship with the entire organization. it's not about only one individual in connecting with just one person in the organization. In nonprofit world, people come and go all the time. Transitions is something that we witness every day. So make sure that your relationship is with the entire organization with focus on greater community impact.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Cheryl and Alicia.
I will go first and just share the point that I think that in order for a partnership like the one that we've experienced to be successful, it really needs to fit the needs of the partner agency. If we had been approached about being a part and hosting students and participating in this project, and it would have taken a lot, right? It would, if it was out of alignment or a significant pivot or adjustment for us to be able to be a part of this, I don't know that we would have been able to do that. I know for my agency and so many nonprofits, we're stretched thin, right? There's so many things that we need to do. There are ever increasing community demands, and often we are trying to do more with less. And so when it's a project and a partnership that fits with not only the needs, but the efforts that are already going in that agency, that's a much easier yes. And it's, oh yes, like not only does that in alignment and it's going to increase our impact, but it's going to bring something to us, right? It's going to help us in the mission that we're trying to achieve. That I think is why we've been able to be a part of this project for, the last 10 years.
Thank you, Alicia. And I would, in echo and in expanding on that, my experience with all of the partners that have been so crucial to helping us prepare students and ultimately impacting, if we have 200 graduates from the School of Social Work that have completed this, we have thousands of children, thousands and thousands in the state of Michigan that have benefited from and been impacted by this. We have to, as members of the university community, when we partner, recognize that nonprofits and public agencies, their missions are greater than ours, and our work has to align around their mission and bring critical resources to them that advance their mission. And as my colleagues from the university have said, then we align our work around helping to advance their mission. And the other thing I would add to that, which Evelyn said clearly too, is investing in relationships is really critical. And it's not one relationship, it's all relationships, and it's investing and reinvesting and restarting. And relationships aren't always easy, and sometimes they fall apart. And I go back as that turnover happens, what was a rough partnership last year, maybe a strong one next year, because we have something value added to bring to them.
My thanks to all of you for your contributions to our discussion. We've had the Zoom question and answer module open, and I've been trying to prod the audience a little bit. We're still waiting for questions, but I want to ask, I want to create an opportunity too for some crosstalk among the folks that are here. One question did just come in. For those of us who would like to start one of these types of partnerships, but doesn't know anyone yet, where do we begin? I open that up to anyone.
I will say that you have to understand your community. So you have to do the homework. You have to identify, if you want to work with the community, you have to understand the community. Who are the leaders in the community? What are those organizations? Where those organizations are? And then, as we did, we contacted them and walk to them and say, can I have a meeting? Can I have have half an hour, 1 hour of your time? And we went to them so that we intentionally reach out, identifying those leaders in the community that can help us and recognizing their leadership.
Thank you, Irving. Others?
I would say leverage your network. If this is someone who's seeking a partnership, who's currently based on campus to engage with folks in university outreach and engagement, feel free to connect with me and pardon my 8-month-old in the background. She's practicing her voice and practicing clapping her hands at the moment. Leverage your network, reach out to those who have established these types of partnerships previously, and then Irving said, leverage some connections in your own community.
I would echo the using outreach and engagement. And I don't know that anybody that I worked, when I first came to work in this community, I was working in a community agency and was on the agency side of a partnership. That's how I came to know the work of the university and being connected to it. That was some 20 years ago. I now am at the university, but I come from that community. So like others have said, we have to figure out how to be a part of, engaged in, and useful to the community that we want to connect with.
I think those are all suggestions kind of along those lines. I think our MSU Alumni Network is oftentimes a way. So sometimes in tapping into that alumni network, for example, as a guest speaker in a class, can begin a conversation about, what are the issues and, that agency or community organization is dealing with, and start the conversation there. I had another thought, but it just escaped my mind.
Maybe it'll return. Others? I guess I would throw out too, so University Outreach and Engagement is an office in the university that can help with those connections. There are certainly lots of others in the campus. Some folks have mentioned the alumni office, MSU Extension. A lot of times we think about their work primarily with agriculture and with youth, but they're all over the place, and they can also be very helpful in this regard. We have a number of youth programs that are run by different parts of our campus as well. A lot of the people that run those programs have got tight relationships with different parts of the community. So I think that the idea of reaching out broadly makes a lot of sense.
I think, senior colleagues who may have been involved in this kind of work for a number of years oftentimes find themselves with more than they can handle. I would encourage those kind of conversations, with people that are currently engaged, because usually there are many tentacles to these partnerships.
Okay. Do any of the panelists have any questions that they want to throw out to the others on the panel? We didn't plan for that, but it's one of the things that's interesting about a session like this and getting to hear from so many others. One thing I was really struck by in the conversations was that, and not surprisingly, we talk about the relationship building as being core to this work. This is very relational work, but the degree to which you all elaborated on it in different dimensions, I thought was really helpful. I really appreciated that. Okay, well, we don't have any other questions on the docket right now, so I think we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up. This has been a fascinating discussion. I'd like to recognize all of our panelists one more time. Brian Beverly and Evelyn Jones, Edmund McGarrell and James Yake, Irving Vega and Evelyn Esparza Gonzalez, and Cheryl Williams Hexel and Alicia Barajas. Thank you all for your thoughtful observations and remarks. I'll be reflecting on them for a while. I took copious notes as you were talking, so I really appreciate it. I would also like to thank everyone participating by Zoom for attending our panel discussion today. Now, please join me in welcoming back Miles Mcnall, Director for Community Engaged Research with the Office for Public Engagement and Scholarship, for some closing thoughts. Miles.
Thank you, Bert. First, I'd like to share my screen and share the contact information for our panelists with you. So if you want to reach out to any of them directly, you may do so. And these slides will also be found on the conference website. And finally, I would like to thank all of our panelists across all of the sessions for sharing their insights on how research can benefit communities through partnerships like the ones that we have heard about in this session. Thanks to our attendees for participating in the sessions and asking great questions, to our moderators for facilitating the sessions, for our partners from the Vice President for Research and Innovation Office, Shobha Ramanand and Marianne Walker, who helped design and facilitate the conference, our logistics lead and Zoom master, Julie Crouchy, John Furshan from VPRI for his Zoom expertise and support, Gada Georgis from UOE for communications support, Diane Dobrnik also from UOE for her input on the conference design, and the support of the VPRI UOE leadership for this important work. We appreciate it greatly. And to all our attendees, we hope to see you at our BI workshop on May 10th. And we hope to hear from you as you are developing your BI plans for proposals. Thank you all for coming.